Okay, good to see everyone, and hopefully this new schedule will work out. I know Rabbi Basul had the 7 o'clock. It was a little sparse in attendance, but we'll get there. We'll grow it. So we're going to start. We're going to continue with the laws of building, and particularly we're talking about this loose term of building a tent. And we had talked about various different types of tents that could be, and actually we have these types of things in our homes, whether it be awnings and strollers and umbrellas and different types of umbrellas. You know, we talked about the standard umbrella that you hold to protect yourself from the rain, but we also talked about the umbrella which was like the pool umbrella, the one that's in the ground, and so on and so forth. So an interesting topic that comes up, which I can tell you, I've had a number of conversations about this, and I'll tell you as I go along. I'll tell you a funny story or semi-funny story as I explain the halacha. So it says like this. It says Asur lahabosh b'Shabbat afilu b'toch habayit kova sheyesh lo safa rechava tefach im haya kashe b'yoter she'eno nichfas sharei ze oseh ohel aray b'Shabbat. So I'm going to start with the basic statement, and then we'll expand to how we understand this. It says that you're not allowed to wear a hat on Shabbat. Again, you're not allowed to wear a hat, a head covering on Shabbat, if the following thing applies. It has what we'll call a brim. You know, the piece that sticks out. You know, either in the front or on the side. Right? If it has a brim, that the width of the brim, meaning how wide it is, if you, I guess, turn it on its side, if it's more than a tefach being a hand amount. And actually, as ridiculous as this is, give me 1 second, I'm going to bring a couple of examples.
IG, do you hear us?
Hey, Nathan, now I do.
Okay.
I signed out. Now I'm back in. How you doing?
I read a little article about your company. You donate trucks to move the face masks?
Oh, yeah. We've been helping moving product around to help the needy. Yeah.
Good.
Very nice.
Thank you. How you guys doing?
Doing all right. We missed you last week. I didn't see you around. Right?
I've been praying early. I did the 7 o'clock with Jack now.
We need Joe Mita to do attendance. We need the.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have here a couple of hats. Okay, and actually I have another hat, which I'm going to explain all these different halachot. So a hat has a couple of different parts to it, right? It has the part that sits on your head, but it also has the brim. Okay, so the concern in the halacha is that you might not be allowed to wear a hat on Shabbat if the brim, that's this piece right here, right? This piece. If the brim is wide enough, okay, how wide would it have to be? So this one is a little wider than this one, as you can see, like this would have different styles of hats. So if the brim is wide enough that it's a tefach, which is, figure 3-4 inches, right? If it's that wide and the brim is not like this one where it's foldable and flexible, but rather it's hard, right? And it's, kind of like a baseball cap and doesn't bend. If you have both aspects, right, it's thick and it doesn't bend, then the halacha says that is kind of like making a tent, and you may not wear that hat on Shabbat. And that would be true inside, outside, or what have you. So now I'm going to tell you a story. I was walking one. This is going back many, many years ago. I want to say certainly more than 15, maybe 18, 20 years ago. I was wearing a baseball hat on Shabbat because I wear baseball hats a lot. I was walking down the street, and Rabbi Aluf saw me. And he started killing me. He was yelling as the way Rabbi Aluf likes to do, that you can't wear that on Shabbat. Went crazy on me that you can't wear a baseball hat on Shabbat, which the truth, I just didn't know. It's a little bit of an obscure halacha. I had not heard of it before, and so I didn't know. Later, he told me he just doesn't like baseball hats. And he didn't think that I should wear a baseball hat as a rabbi. Okay, so that was so it wasn't actually what he was telling me was the halacha, but this halacha has always stuck in my head because I got fried on it one time. Anyway, but all that said, so again, for it to be a problem, it has to be two things. It has to have a very wide brim, because even most wide brims that you have are not that wide, and that brim has to be not flexible. However, if you look at a baseball hat, so there's baseball hats, I'm looking at my baseball hat here, right? And it's pretty much, that's the size. So a baseball hat actually does have a brim that's wide enough, usually, for it to be a problem. However, the question is, does it bend? It's a question, right? So if you look at my baseball hat, most people will tell you it bends, right? You could see that it's bent, and people, that's the style of wearing it. Sometimes they wear it flat, but sometimes they bend it, but it's bendable, and therefore it's considered bendable and so on. Now I have to tell you, by the way, you also should know that this is a big question. We're talking about this question in halakha, so most of us don't wear hats all that often. But when you're talking to people who keep halakha very, very strictly, part of what you're talking about is a group of people that like to wear hats, right? I'm not only talking about yeshiva guys, but also think of all the various different types of chassidim, like the gerer guys, that wear those shtreimels and things like that. Some of those are pretty big. And it's a good question of how flexible those are or are meant to be. So this halacha has, potential for major disaster. So he says like this: makom. Nevertheless, bismanenu, in our days, and makpidim shelo lachbosh mikbat balat shulayim rechavot. Says today we're really not so strict about this concept of not wearing a hat with a wide brim. Kevan sha'isur hu rak sheyesh berochav hashulayim tefach. He says, generally, because of the rule that it has to be wide of a handbreadth, and also that it has to be super firm and unbending. He says, and most hats don't have that breadth. He says, and in general, hats are not made to make a tent. They're generally made for design and to be nice and so on. They're not there to protect you. It's a big question, but basically what he's telling you is that for the most part, people, the custom is you can wear a hat. And since the custom is that you can wear a hat, even though strict reading of the halacha might make this more of a problem, it's not the prevailing custom, it's not a problem, and therefore we could do it. And only because he didn't like the way it looked was the reason Rabbi Aluf yelled at me, not because it was forbidden, as he explained to me afterwards. So he says, I just want to read the footnote here also, which I don't usually do. And he says the following. He says, the Tzitz Eliezer, who is a contemporary posek named Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, sheyesh li zaher shekasher samim kova geshamim al mikbaot b'Shabbat, lo lesimo lasadro kafi shu b'govho kederech shemesodrim oto b'chol, kevan shebaofen kaze yesh b'govho chalal tefach, ela yasim oto al hamikbat כשהוא מקופל באופן שלא יבלוט ולא יהיה מגובה בתוכיותו לכדי לחלל טפח. So here he's talking about a situation where people put a covering on their hat. You may have seen this. A lot of the for lack of a better term, what I'll call religious hat wearers, they don't wear their hat is there for a reason other than to protect them from the rain. So when it actually rains, they put a protection over their hat, right? You might have seen this. They put some people just put a plastic bag, or if you go to the hat store, they actually have hat covers that people wear when it rains. So he says there might be some concern that that when you put the cover on, then it extends and it's an additional issue. But basically, we go back to the point of saying that the prevailing custom is that there's not a problem of wearing a hat on Shabbat. And whether it be a baseball hat or a rain hat or some other hat, basically it's not a problem. And mainly because we would add in what he said at the very end here, which was that anyway, hats are not worn today primarily for protection. Although I'm going to maybe make one exception to this, but that hat won't be a problem either. But hats are primarily not worn as protection. They're not worn as a tent. Now the truth is, in the summertime, many of us wear hats in order to protect against the sun, right? Which today the sun is more of an issue than actually the rain, right? You get wet, you wipe it off. But the sun, we know, can have much greater long-term effects, sun poisoning and melanoma and things like that. So we have to be careful about those things. So a lot of us will wear particular types of hats, and in fact, somewhat in vogue today is the bigger, flappier hats in order to protect. Like you'll see sometimes people have the hat that has the piece down the back to protect their neck or something like that. So these things are all, could be problems, but they're not, because number one, they're generally not both. They don't cover. They're usually not wide and hard, right? I mean, they're not a tefach wide and hard like a real protective covering. And also, we usually wear them. The prevailing custom is to wear them for style less than for the covering. So for all those reasons, we tend to be lenient. So that's my piece on hats. Okay. The next thing that he talks about is something interesting. Again, we're talking about not putting a tent, even a temporary one. So a classic case of a halachic situation where we would put a tent is when on Simchat Torah, right? On Simchat Torah, what do? We like to call the children up to the Torah. And when we call the children up to the Torah, what's the custom in our shul and in many other synagogues, right? Is to spread a talet out or two or three. Are we allowed to do that? Given that we're effectively setting up a tent, which we've said you're not allowed to do. So he says like this: says there's a custom to on Simchat Torah to spread a talet over the heads of the children as they go up to the Torah. Says there's what to rely on in this custom. It's not a problem of creating a temporary tent. Because what do? We hold it with our hands. It's different substantially than a tent in that we don't take the talet and tie it or hold it up in any way on some kind of pole or other pillar or support that will hold it up to make it similar to a tent, and therefore it's not a tent. Says, and the same thing is true. He says, where else do you do it? I see Joe Romano, right? The kotel, right? At the kotel, you'll see a lot of times people will spread out the talet to protect against the rain, the sun, or something like that. He says, same thing, not a problem, because you're just using your hand and holding it. He says, but if you were to, the implication is, if you were to take the talet and take some kind of stick, pole, or something like that and prop it up, that could potentially be a problem, and we wouldn't do that. And if you remember when we were talking about a chuppah, so a chuppah is usable on Shabbat if it's been preset. It's been established that it could be set up that way. And in fact, we said that sometimes we'll have a a Sefer Torah Hachnasa. We'll bring in a Sefer Torah on a Shabbat, and it's okay to do. And a lot of times we have that chuppah for that ceremony. You can do it, but what the recommended thing to do is that those poles are already inserted into their spots from before Shabbat. So you're just spreading it out, but you're not constructing it and you're not building it. So the same thing, the same idea keeps going with this. Okay. Let's keep going further. מותר בשבת לחסות כל כלי בכיסוי המיוחד לו, או בכל דבר המיוחד לכיסוי, אפילו אם נוצר חלל טפח בין הכיסוי לאוכל שבכלי, בכלים קטנים כגון כדרות, שאר כלי סעודה, מותר לחסותם גם במגבעת, וצלחת שאינם מיוחדים לכסות בהם, אבל כלי גדול כגון חבית גדולה, אסור לכסותו כולו במגבעת, וכיוצא בהן שאינם מיוחדים לכסות בהם, אם נוצר חלל בשיעור טפח בין הכיסוי למה שבתוך החבית, אלא יניח קצת ממנו מגולה. So he says, there's a potential when you cover some kind of utensil to create some kind of tent, right? So what would it be? Imagine you had this like huge keg or barrel, right? And in theory, the keg or barrel could be large enough that if you put a cover on it, it could be considered creating a tent. So let me give another example. Right? Let's say you had, here's where it could be a question, right? Let's say you have I'm going to take the water out of it, right? Let's say you have an empty jacuzzi, right? And you wanted to put or a large bathtub or something like that, and you wanted to put a cover over it. Is that a problem? Because you're putting a tent over that area. So he says, if it's already that way, it's made for that and it's set up that way. So meaning it's a standard, either you're just rolling something out that's already there or it's made to do that. He says it's not a problem, but to create it from scratch, right? To just start doing that would be a problem. He says, but it would have to be a pretty large utensil for it to be a problem. So to put a bottle cap on a bottle or something like that is not a problem. Okay. He says also you don't have to worry about putting a cover on top of food or something like that to protect it from the sun or from bugs or anything like that. That's not a problem. Okay, just going to finish up this area of halacha, and then we'll move to the next thing starting tomorrow. What about setting up some kind of, instead of a cover, but some kind of partition, like a mechitza? It says, מותר לעשות לכתחילה בשבת מחיצה של ארעי, ואפילו שעושה אותה כדי להגן מפני החמה ומפני הצינה, ולא נחשבת כהל בשביל כך, וכן אם עושה אותה בשביל הנרות שלא יכבו, או שעושה אותה לצניעות כגון להפסיק בין אנשים לנשים שלא יראו זה את זה, מותר. You're allowed to set up a temporary tent. You're allowed, not a tent, sorry. You're allowed to set up a temporary mechitza. A mechitza means something dividing between two things. It's not on top, but it's dividing between two things. So what might we be dividing between? We might be dividing between dark and light, right? Like there might be a lamp in your room and you want to put something in the way so you could go to sleep, or you want to divide between men and women so that they could pray, or even outside in the sun. Right, we talked about a potential problem for an umbrella, but it's not a problem if you're doing a straight up-down item. Side to side is not a problem. It's only when it creates a covering underneath that it becomes a problem of a tent that we've been talking about. Okay.
What about if you have a canvas?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Like a patio, and then you have an extra canvas.
So what we had said, what we had said about a patio, and we had talked about this, is it's not so simple, right? The best thing to do, like for example, awnings or pergolas or things like that we talked about, is if it could be open a little bit before you open it on Shabbat, it's fine, right? How much is a little bit? The tefach, right? So that usually is going to be okay to do. So if you're going to have an awning or something that you're going to open, if you could have it open a little bit before Shabbat, that makes a big difference in halacha, and you're able to do it if you have it open. The same thing with umbrellas by the pool, we had said. or something like that. You can't use a regular umbrella on Shabbat. We talked about that. The carrying umbrella that you go from place to place with to protect from the rain or the sun, you may not use on Shabbat. However, what we did say is that if it's in the ground, right, it's a permanent or semi-permanent type of setup. If it's somewhat open a little bit, then it's okay. So the umbrella, if you have by the pool or on the patio or something like that, the ones that go into the ground or that has the weight on it, don't leave it closed tightly all the way, right? Leave it open just a little bit, and then you can open it and close it, and it's not a problem on Shabbat. So that's and the same thing with the pergola. A pergola, for those not remembering, is where you have like a kind of like a gazebo, not a gazebo. What do you call? But the pillars that are there or posts that are there, and then you spread the mat over it. If the mat is open just a little bit, then it's fine. You don't have a problem. It's when the mat is completely closed and then you open it, that's when it's a problem. So we want to try and avoid those types of situations. Let's see. So one last thing, and we'll close with this, is he talks about a case where you have like a movable screen. Now, I'm not talking about the screen door. I'm talking more about the one that just hangs, right? And you open it and close it, and he says that's not a problem. In terms of having that on Shabbat, you don't have to worry about sliding it or opening a curtain this way or that way. None of those things are a problem. The issue has, again, when we're going side to side and it's temporary, we're not so concerned about that. You can't go and build a wall because that would be a different concept, but we're talking about temporary things. So temporary mechitzot are okay. Also you have like those oriental screens, that sometimes they fold up, and yet you can take it, you can open it up and put it out there. Not a problem. Because that's not building. Building is really, when we're talking, building has to be either permanent or it's covering something. But if it's neither permanent or covering something, it's not a problem. Let's stop here for today, and we're going to start the Shacharit Tefillah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Good to see everybody.